Hello, my name is Chaplain Tota, and I would like to read with you a story from Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Rachel Naomi Riemann. This story is What If God Blinks? When I was small, God was still discussed in public schools. I remember one assembly in which our principal, a fundamentalist, delivered a fire and brimstone kind of sermon to the entire grammar school. She read a passage from the Bible to us and told us it was important that we kneel and pray 3 times a day because we needed to remind God that we were there. Thinking back, she may not have said this in so many words, but this is what I took away. You prayed because you had to make him look at you. If God turned his face from you, she told the hushed assembly of children, you would wither up and die like an autumn leaf. And this part I am sure of. She actually held up a large, dried, and withered leaf. Even as a 5-year-old, it seemed to me that God had a lot of other things on his mind besides me. And in between the times that I was praying, he might blink. And then, what would become of me? I remember the fear, the enormous terror. What if God blinks? I became so obsessed with this question, so fearful, I was unable to sleep. My parents were young socialists who considered religion to be the opiate of the masses, and my grandfather, who was a rabbi, was my only connection to a reality larger than social well-being and the class struggle. When I was this small, I actually thought of God as a friend of his, like the men who came over to smoke cigars and play gin rummy in our kitchen with my father. As these fears were not something I could discuss with my parents, I had to wait until my grandfather visited. It was probably only a few days, but I remember the waiting. I didn't think you could feel such anguish and aloneness as an adult. You have to be very young. When I finally got my grandfather to myself, I told him what had happened. Shaking, I asked him the fearful question, what if God blinks? And at last my terror overwhelmed me, and I leaned against his shoulder and began to cry. My grandfather stroked my hair to comfort me. Despite his gentleness, he seemed distressed and even angry. But in his usual calm way, he answered my question with some questions of his own. Nashamu Le, he said. And by the way, for years I thought that my grandfather's name for me meant Little Naomi. It actually means little soul. If you woke up in the night in your room, would you know if your mother and father had gone out and left you alone in the house? Still crying, I nodded yes. How would you know that? He asked. Would you see them and look at them? I shook my head no. Would you hear them? No. Could you touch them? By then I had stopped crying, and I remember puzzling over his questions because it seemed obvious to me that I would simply know, that I wasn't alone in the house. I told him this, and he nodded, pleased. Good, good. That's how God knows you're there. He doesn't need to look at you to know that you are there. He just knows. In just the same way, you know that God is there. You just know that he is there, and you're not alone in the house. God's presence in the house is an inner experience that never changes. It's a relationship that's there all the time, even when we're not paying attention to it. Perhaps the infinite holds us to itself in the same way the earth does. Like gravity, if it ever stopped, we would know it instantly, but it never does. The inner knowing is a way in which I orient myself as an unfailing point of reference. Its effect on my life is profound, as deep as gravity's influence on my body. More than anything else, my sense of not being alone in the house has been what has allowed me to accompany people as they meet with pain, illness, and sometimes death. So let us take a moment and realize the sacred presence that surrounds us. Thank you for joining me.